Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you coming and hope that you enjoy this. We are the Center for K-12 Captivity Studies, and there are two things that make us different from most of the school choice relevant organizations that you know of. First of all, we focus on the structural problem of government-created and controlled schools. And the structural problem is crystallized in one word, and that is captivity. By structural, we mean conditions created by policy that create the very operational mechanisms of the public schools, as well as the attitudes and culture of their personnel. And by captivity, we mean mandatory attendance at the child's local public school in order to get what many think of as free schooling. The second thing is our goal is to free all U.S. children, not just some of them. We believe that we won't win educational freedom for all kids until we expose the many forms of damage caused by this structure of captivity. Okay, now turning to John. We're so happy to have John with us today. He was a professor of economics for 35 years, and he's now the founder and chief of the Institute for Objective Policy Assessment. Of course, he's professor of emeritus of economics. This is from the University of Texas, San Antonio. John has published widely on a number of topics, one of which is school choice. And school system reform, I think, is the title of one of his 3 education-related books. His other topics include public finance and environmental economics. So when I say widely published, I mean that. Today, John's going to illustrate the hypothesized effect of U.S. public schooling on the concentration of poverty. He's going to discuss how alternatives to government public schools are likely to reduce poverty concentration, and he's going to emphasize the need for nationwide access to these alternatives to assigned public schools. To do so, he's going to share his mapping research with us, which shows alarming patterns of SES polarization in U.S. cities. And this is active and ongoing, and it's sorting of people by economic status. He's then going to discuss the hypothesis, which is that this sorting is related to public school captivity, measured by the presence or absence of school alternatives to the local public school. So during the first 25 minutes or so, John's going to discuss these remarkable findings. And then after that, I'm going to begin the questioning with a couple of questions of my own, and then turn to you all for your questions. John, please go ahead.
Thank you. And again, thank you all for coming. And when we get this on YouTube, please share it widely. I'm going to move to my PowerPoint here for my outline. And let me get it all on slideshow. There we go. Oops. I was going over that. Let me get it up to the first slide. There we go. All right. So, yeah, attendance area captivity concentrates the poorest families around the worst schools. That's our point, and the result is devastating socioeconomic status polarization that you can see on a map, and sometimes seeing really emphasize points above and beyond just being able to argue things. So I'm going to show you some of those maps today, and we'll go over several of them without much comment, just to show you that this is a widespread phenomenon. So again, a more elaborate definition of captivity. We have children trapped in poor fit schools. And I say that without regard to the school's quality, because every school is a poor fit to somebody assigned to it. No amount of money will make one size fit all. And we're getting more and more school choice, but it's still pretty rare, and the choice schools are not funded nearly at the level of the traditional public schools. So that's another element of captivity. And housing costs more in the attendance areas of the most popular schools. That makes it hard for the lower income people to move to where the better schools are. So those are the 3 key elements of the captivity phenomenon that we're here to fully explore. And I say explore because this hypothesis that we're going to talk about today is just that. Captivity is a major cause of socioeconomic polarization. And this phenomenon of people moving to better the attendance areas of better schools, that is without question a phenomenon that is real. And so therefore, the issue is how major of a cause is captivity in socioeconomic polarization. That's what we need to do research to substantiate, because uh, any realtor will tell you that better perceived schooling will drive up the price of housing. So, and there are studies that document that. So if our hypothesis is true that it is a major factor, then school choice expansion can be a major tool, emphasizing that, in significantly reducing socioeconomic polarization and its devastating effects. Now, I say can, and I underlined it there in my presentation because any form of school choice expansion is not assured to do this. There are probably only some, probably only universal choice. But again, that'll be part of the research to see how much school choice expansion we need to counteract these polarization effects. Right, to see the devastating polarization of U.S. cities, and I mean all across the country, this is the norm, not an exception. We need to map relative poverty. Okay, so the fact that we sort people into different parts of cities where the poorer people see mostly poor people and wealthier people see mostly wealthier people in their neighborhoods. Given our focus of our center and the Institute for Objective Policy Assessment on productive K-12 school system reform, we chose this particular measure of relative poverty, I struggle to say the word median family income rate, 2023 data. And we're going to look at zip code areas, in part because everybody knows their zip code. You can do the same thing by census tract, but we're going to look at zip code areas. So what is a median family income rate? It's the zip code area median family income divided by the median family income of the metropolitan area that zip code is a part of. And kind of out of the blue, I'm going to announce that most U.S. cities are much more polarized by socioeconomic status than any of the 6 Canadian cities. And I say out of the blue because, how did you know I was going to be talking about Canada? But this is important because the U.S. data may not be up to par yet in teasing out all aspects of this phenomenon, but Canada has had school choice in most of Canada for a long time. Most Canadians already have one fully public funded alternative to their assigned public school. And 2 provinces in Canada, Alberta and British Columbia, have had universal private school choice and charter choice since the 1970s. So these Canadian cities, especially in the high choice provinces, but even in some of the others, have had an opportunity for this sorting, or in Canada, the lesser degree of it, to fully take hold. And I'm not sure that exists yet in American cities. We'll touch on that issue a little bit later. A few major U.S. cities have less polarization than Canada's worst, which is their national capital, Ottawa. And that's important for research because we have to have diversity in the data in order to tease out the effect of each of the hypothesized determinants of that polarization. When I first saw this, you don't fully understand this yet because you haven't studied the legend, and I'll get into that in a minute. But when I first saw this map of Vancouver, British Columbia, my jaw just dropped to the floor because there's only one color, and it's the virtuous color, the median color that you see there. Nearly everybody in Vancouver lives in a postal zone, a zip code area that is in the middle range of socioeconomic status. Let me go to the legend here so you can understand why this is a stunning example of frankly what we should strive for in the United States and, for that matter, in the rest of Canada. So you see the color that dominated that map was the median green you see in the middle of this slide, where the MFIR is between 0.8 and 1.2. That means that the median family income in nearly all of Vancouver is between 80% and 120% of the median family income of the metropolitan statistical area that Vancouver is where Vancouver is the main city. And I'm going to go back to the Vancouver slide. I want to point out that the two lightest colors are of the beige color for the really poor people, again, relative poverty is non-existent in the Vancouver map. And the lightest green, where the median family income is between 60 and 80% of the surrounding metropolitan area, that's almost absent from that slide. And the rare super dark green at the bottom, where the median family income rate is over twice what it is for the surrounding, and that's totally missing. Let's go back to the slide. So you see that nearly everybody in Vancouver lives in a postal zone where the median family income rate is between 80% and 120% of the area for whole. There's a couple, let me get my laser pointer here. There's a couple of really poor, not really poor, between 60 and 80% here, and there's some up here where there's not too many folks living. This white area, that's no data. That's not a really poor place, and not enough people live here for the data to reflect median family income. Nearly everybody lives in this median green, where median family income is between 80% and 120%. Let's move on to a sad contrast to that, which is where I lived for 32 years, San Antonio, Texas. And you see here, nearly the entire inner ring, and if you've been into San Antonio, this is Loop 410, nearly the entire city is between below 60% MFIR, or here 60 to 80%. Here's where I lived for a while, 78212. Notice the contrast between there, more than twice the rate where I used to live and where the so-called O-9ers live in Alamo Heights compared to the surrounding area. And of course, most of the money in San Antonio is in the hill country up here north of town. This is where the university is, which is relatively new in San Antonio. So, and down here, there's a Toyota factory that's new. Notice that didn't do much for the relative poverty of this area. Why? Because while people work here, they drive here. Imagine the fuel consumption that results from people working in downtown and higher income people either living in this little cluster here or way out here in the hill country. They've got to commute all the way into town and back every day. So sadly, it can get even worse than that, although that's arguably as bad as it gets. But have a look at the Dallas-Fort Worth area where we do see some of the really dark green here. The dark green areas here and of northern Dallas are over 3 times the median family income of these beige colored areas below 60%, and then the kind of the lightest green between 60 and 80% median family income compared to the area as a whole. Likewise, Fort Worth, and another one of these high income areas. So some serious polarization. Notice here we have some areas adjacent to each other where the median family income in this area is over 3 times what it is in the area just north of it and just east of it, and over twice what it is in this other area just to the east of it as well. And again, just to show you that this is the norm, not the exception. So we move further east to Jackson, Mississippi. Again, a huge area in the middle where we have that really low relative poverty. So folks are out here with money living out here on the east side of Jackson, commuting into town, dominated by the low-income residents in their downtown. Again, the legend there for you to have a quick look at in case you're still, and by I mean still, this is the norm. It takes a while for the different colors to have the meaning that they have. Again, the dark green was not present either in the San Antonio map, but I mean, so the rare super dark or the Jackson map, but it was there in the Dallas-Fort Worth map. So again, just continuing our surfing across the country. Here's Chicago. Okay, so we have the the north side of Chicago along the lakeshore, super duper wealthy, relatively. Most of Chicago, the south and near west side, very poor, relatively speaking. Some other areas out here that are high wealth. But again, think of this map compared to the Vancouver map. Most of Vancouver was this color right here. Okay. Almost none of this map or any of the others that have preceded it for the United States are in this middle virtuous zone where the median family income is between 80% and 120% of the for the area as a whole. Here's New York with Long Island. There's Newark. Here's Lower Manhattan. Here's Harlem. Here's Queens, Brooklyn, Long Island. Lots of money out there, relatively speaking, west of Newark. Again, think of all the fuel that's burned getting to and from these major work centers from these outlying areas where we hypothesize that people have found better schooling, and that has driven much of the movement out to these areas when families first child reaches school age. Baltimore, okay, lots of this really poor stuff. Also the nearly poor stuff. Again, the virtuous color that dominates Vancouver is relatively rare for Baltimore as it is for the other U.S. cities we've shown. Here now we're on the West Coast, Los Angeles, some really rich folks out here dominating inner Los Angeles, either the pretty poor color. By pretty, I don't mean virtuously pretty, but not as bad as this, but still really poor. And the legend for you to refresh your memory on exactly what those colors mean, the median green being what you'd like to have most of your city or metro area. Seattle, Tacoma, same thing. Doesn't look quite as bad, but again, the contrast is pretty strong here between this high income cluster and the medium and lower income clusters further south here. This is Tacoma, and this is Seattle up here. So Tacoma, relatively poor. Seattle, some poverty, not as bad. And then north and east of Seattle, where the well-to-do folks dominate. So, you might be asking, okay, so we have a tale of two cities and there's lots of polarization. Why is this bad? Well, there's a narrative that says that poverty creates bad schools, and our argument in part is that bad schools create poverty. So it goes both ways. So indeed, once people start sorting themselves by income, once we start concentrating the poorest people around the worst schools, we drag the mediocre schools into failure. We make the bad schools worse and the mediocre schools not as good as they otherwise would have been when in a more mixed income area. By concentrating poverty, we create blight, we create pollution, we lose entire areas to ghettoization. And indeed, when you concentrate poverty, you create more poverty, crime, intolerance of different people. People are only mostly around people like themselves, marriage deserts. Remember, we incentivize absent fathers through our welfare payments. And so you get marriage deserts. We have role model scarcity. There aren't as many examples of success for lower income children to try to emulate. And absorb the fact that these terrible consequences are the result of families attempting to do right by their children. We're getting these terrible effects because the families with means that can move to where the better schools are can do that. And by their actions, they drive up property values near the better schools, and as a result, block access to those better schools to the lowest income families. Terrible social consequences are the result of families attempting to do right by their children. I'm shaking my head because that should never be. All right, an important question. Can we use U.S. data and maps to test our hypotheses? And again, just to refresh your memory on what our hypothesis is that captivity is a major cause of socioeconomic status polarization. And if that's true, that means some forms of school choice expansion will reduce socioeconomic polarization. And my answer to the question is, and this is why I'm looking at Canada alongside US data, I'm still leaning towards the answer to that question about using US data and maps to test our hypothesis with the answer not yet. But take a look at the map of Phoenix. Phoenix is in Arizona, and Arizona and Florida are our two leading school choice states, although with our 2023 data, these cities do not yet reflect the universal choice. The maps of these cities do not yet reflect the universal choice that both of those states and a couple of others have enacted, and a few other states have enacted universally eligibility, but have capped participation. So this Phoenix map, maybe it's just my imagination. Maybe I'm wishing that, but there's still quite a bit of polarization here, but it doesn't look nearly as bad as the Dallas map or the San Antonio map or the New York map or the LA map. So maybe the fact that Arizona and Phoenix being the major metro area has introduced significant elements of school choice for, frankly, including their charter law for over 30 years. Maybe that's already starting to take effect here. And so maybe there is some US data that we can use to explore our hypothesis and either confirm it or not. And look at Miami. Again, still quite a bit of polarization here. I mean, these are poor areas. These are really poor areas. And these are really rich areas where my pointer is. But it doesn't look nearly as bad as San Antonio or Memphis. I'm sorry, Memphis does look bad. That wasn't one of my maps, but Jackson, LA, all of those that I showed. So anyway, a kind of a teaser. Again, here's our legend. In case you've lost track of what those colors mean, let me just go back to this again. The Vancouver dominant color, right, is a little more prominent here than for most U.S. cities. And the stuff that's pretty prominent in San Antonio, pretty scarce here in Miami and likewise in Phoenix. Okay, so now we finish in terms of our maps with the Milwaukee map. This gets to the point of using school choice expansion to foster depolarization. And so earlier I said it can do so. It may do so. And here's the scary part of that phrase, that it may not, right? Because Milwaukee has had family means tested school choice expansion for about 30 years. But because we concentrated the eligibility, and it's exclusively for lower income families in Milwaukee, we seem to have fostered more polarization. We're going to need to look at the research and see whether this has gotten worse or whether it's just persisted or maybe even gotten a little bit better. But there's still plenty of polarization in Milwaukee, and I would hypothesize that it's because it's family means tested. So we were actually encouraging poor people to move into inner Milwaukee because that's where the new schools are going to be that are going to take advantage of school choice expansion. We've got the higher income folks here on the lakeshore. Again, we have a situation where there's going to be a lot of driving of folks in and out of the city every day. That's one of the reasons my friend Bart Danielson created an organization called Environmentalists for Effective Education, because this is an environmental disaster, as well as the Dallas map and the San Antonio map, as well as a schooling disaster and a tale of two cities disaster. So politics yields tough calls. Does that map mean that the Milwaukee voucher program was a mistake, that we created maybe intensified polarization that already results from captivity and made it worse through family means testing? Many children gained, of course. I mean, we've documented that in Milwaukee. So it's, that's what I mean by tough calls. We've made something worse and we've made it better, and we can intensify the better aspects of it and reduce the negative aspects of targeting when it becomes politically necessary to enact choice expansion by targeting poor places, not poor families. Let me go back to the Milwaukee slide to quickly explain what that means. So if we can't get the Wisconsin legislature to enact universal school choice, okay, well, maybe we can get them to enact universal school choice in the poorest zip code areas, these zip codes right down here where my pointer is floating around. So then people that would otherwise leave these areas when their children become school age for better schooling in some of these surrounding areas, then they can stay because they can access a private school instead of the assigned school, which may not be acceptable. And this is something that Bart Danielson and I have documented in several cases. You can go to his website where those studies are posted, effectiveeducation.org, anyway. We'll get that information to you if you can't find it with a search. We've documented that those effects are real, right? That people do move into these relatively poor areas if they can gets them a discount on a private school. And those some that would leave have not, and they have stayed. So better targeting, if politically necessary. So universal choice is best. Target 100% of the residents in poor places to keep the affluent families there that would have otherwise left, and recruit affluent families to come there. And something that I documented in my study of Edgewood, another study that you might want to have a look at. So don't target poor families, target 100% of the people in poor places. But even better than that, and targeting places and selectively relying on some states doing something that other states won't do, better than that is liberty for all. For example, through free speech and or equal protection arguments, we may be able to have the funding of this public school system declared unconstitutional. That would create school choice. And that's far better than the approach that we've had with some limited success, and we can celebrate that. And I call it two-pronged tinkering towards utopia with public schools, traditional public schools, trying to do the best they can under their circumstances. I call it central plan optimization. There's a chapter on that in my school system reform book. And as we look at the map of the United States, we see some states moving forward, but what it is, I mean, to put it the right label on it, it's horse trading to appear sporadically less captive, to sporadically less in captivity, which just means that we have to bribe the proponents of the existing system with additional funding for public schools and caps on participation in something that is meant to look universal, but it's not. And we're making progress on that, but we need to liberate all of the kids rather than just barely liberate them and introduce a poison pill here or there to slow the process as part of the bribing, the horse trading that goes on to try to get some legislatures to expand school choice. Well, Martha, I'm ready for some questions.
John, every time I hear this, I'm overcome with just the power of this analysis. And, I wish you well in confirming your hypothesis, because it's our hypothesis for one thing. But my first question then is, what is it that motivated you to go down this road with the mapping?
Well, the main motivation when I was just an environmental economist some years ago was that, my students didn't seem to be very well educated. And my wife was a teacher, and she came home in tears most nights. I mean, we had to stake out at times and places when we would not discuss the terrible things going on at her traditional public school. And that led me to conclude that we needed educational freedom, because no amount of money was going to provide a good fit for all children. And that we also need educational freedom to harness education entrepreneurship to provide those additional options so that all kids can get a good fit. And we need educational freedom because it's a matter of survival for our country. Thomas Jefferson said that in a state of civilization has never existed and never will in a state of ignorance. And Ben Franklin said we created a republic if you can keep it. And so that's all part of what motivates me to make the case for educational freedom. And then through a very fortuitous contact with Bart Danielson, he pointed out that we could use maps to really make a strong case, which hopefully I've just done, make a strong case for school choice expansion, because it's destroying the absence of school choice, except by relocating in most of our cities, is destroying our cities, is creating these terrible polarization effects. And so And then specifically to get into the maps again, Bart Danielson showed me how these effects manifest themselves on maps. So I thought it would be useful to make a bigger deal out of that than he's already done. And then my friend David Hunn in Canada, again, I'm gonna call this an act of God. It contacted me to see what I could do to help make the argument against captivity in Canada. And I said, hey, let's compare a high choice province and a low choice province in Canada, and we can use maps to show that school choice in Canada's had school choice for over 50 years, and that makes a big difference in the polarization by socio-economic. And sure enough, as you noticed from the Vancouver slide, and it's true also for Calgary and Alberta, and to a lesser extent for complicated reasons for the other big city in Alberta, Edmonton. So through that contact with David Hunn in Canada, we have useful data to make that case, and we can do that immediately while we wait for school choice expansion to have a greater effect in the states that do that first here in the United States.
Thank you. I think it's really important to note that Canada, or most Canadians, have had at least one school choice option that Americans have not been able to enjoy, and that was the funding of Catholic schools, public funding of Catholic schools. So I think it's really important to realize how limited choice is in America, the place that had Jefferson and Franklin and others. Okay, so here's another question.
Well, let me just add to that. Even outside those high choice provinces in Canada, Alberta and British Columbia, most Canadians, not all, have a choice of at least two schools
Right.
without having to pay tuition. Two fully publicly funded schools in most of Canada, not just the high choice provinces of Alberta and British Columbia.
And if I'm right, what you told me was that those were the Catholic schools. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So,
Well, and also alternate language schools in some provinces. So some Canadians have a choice of three schools.
goodness, the mind boggles. Okay, so in the U.S., of course, we have a very powerful education establishment lobby, if you want to call it that. So the people who defend the current U.S. public school system are almost assuredly are going to oppose the theory behind your hypothesis, saying that public schools respond to poverty, but they don't create it. Could you just expound on that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, it's a two-way street. It's well documented that people shop for the best schooling when they decide where to live. And so, yeah, the only issue is how important that is in intensifying the struggle, the educational struggle that goes on in our lowest income areas. I lost my train of thought. So it's a two-way street that where poverty is a cause and an effect of some schools being better than others.
Thank you. And if I can just make through this question a plug for the Center for K-12 Captivity Studies. You talked about horse trading, and of course that word it is what it is. I mean, the current school choice strategy uses the political horse trading model in order to gain school choice options, but in doing so, that results in a patchwork of school choice programs across the nation where there is a political attitude in favor of choice, and they're completely absent in the areas where there is no such attitude. Would you please, for the audience, once again, repeat our Center for K-12 Captivity Studies strategy and how that's different?
Yeah, it is longstanding recognition that attendance zones and public funding monopoly of public schools, it's well established that that's had an educational effect direct educational effects because students are stuck in schools that are not working for them. Our center is going way beyond that to show that that's just one of the many effects, and that there are also indirect effects on education, for example, of this concentrating of poverty, but a lot of other factors that we're going to explore here at the Center for K through 12 Captivity Studies that argue for providing educational freedom for all children in all 50 states right away, because it is hurting our cities, it's hurting our country, and we need to move forward on that at a much faster rate than we currently are by trying to persuade enough legislators in one state at a time to, and often, I mean, the horse trading part of that often is that we have to put even more money into an already incredibly funded, one Democrat governor actually a few years ago called it a gold-plated disaster. Boy, he nailed it just right. Of course, there are a lot of good public schools, but none of them fit all of the children assigned to them. None of them. Any one of those schools, if you provided an alternative, some people would leave simply because no amount of money will make one size fit all. So we need to accelerate the process. And even in the states where they have moved forward on school choice expansion, there's, in most of those, all of them, there's still a long way to go.
So if I could, and then this is my last comment, and I'd like to open it up to our wonderful audience. But the point of our center is then to remove one thing, not to add a patchwork of options. The point of our center is to remove the policies that cause students to be captive in these areas. That's what we want to do.
That's
And so
exactly right.
and thank you. And so that would be nationwide, not state by state or city by city, but just to remove that and just imagine the market options and the entrepreneurship and so forth that might come from that. And of course, then in relation to that, to conduct research that shows the reason why that is so necessary. And with that, thank you so much, John. We appreciate this. Audience, if anyone has a question, just shout it out.
I do, Martha. Hi, John, thank you so much for that. That was really wonderful. It's Holly. My
Yes.
question is, we're driving, so I don't have my video up, but my question is, the data that you use to create the maps, is that you said that was current 2023. Can
Yes.
you make the maps to show the change of the poverty over time?
Yes, that'll be one of our things that we do in the research is to
Okay, great.
make older maps, maps of older data to see how that's changed.
Okay, since like school choice policies have been enacted in those particular states or cities, right?
Yes. One of the things that you could do right now, not while you're driving,
No.
but that you could do soon, if you could go to Bart Danielson's website, effectiveed.org. I can remember the exact spelling, Effective Environmentalists for Effective Education. That'll find it. And under the media link, you can find the Texas study, for example, and you could compare the map there of the San Antonio area, it's contained in that study, and the Dallas map to the ones that I just presented. And this video will be on YouTube soon. So you could make some comparisons like that right away, and we will for sure.
Okay. And then my other question is, one of the things that you suggested was about having the focus be on the area, right? So the policy changes being for targeting low income areas, not low income people.
Yes.
But so much of what I hear with funding formulas is attaching the money to the child.
Yes.
So the money is attached to a child in a low income neighborhood.
Yes.
not a family who is low income that would say be in one of the, median green areas. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, the way this would work is that
Okay.
the legislature would designate a, uh, a median family income rate level below which the zip code area everybody living in that zip code becomes eligible for an education savings account or a voucher, hopefully an education savings account that was a little more flexible.
Okay.
Uh, and so everybody in those zip codes that are below that chosen threshold, everybody there is eligible. And and if you're not in one of those zip codes, you're not eligible. That, of course, that's sad, but that's the nature of politics. Is sometimes you can't enact everything you'd like to do, and that's the horse trading part as well. Is you have to accept what's politically possible to move on. As you know, in Texas, the governor had to twist arms to get enough votes to pass what Texas is going to do, and even with that, they had to bribe uh, some legislators with a lot of additional funding for public school system in order to get that passed. And even with that, they have participation caps, so that only 1 out of 5 applicants for that program will actually be funded.
Got it.
So yeah, so everybody, we need universal choice. And if we
Yes.
can't get it for the whole state, whichever state, or for the whole country, we need it at least for the poorest places. And then the legislators can define how poor is poor. I would argue that in a state that does have universal choice already, Arkansas, Arizona, Florida, and West Virginia, that an economic development proposal that guaranteed to work at no fiscal cost is just to provide slightly larger ESAs in the poorest places. Okay, so if it's already universal, it means everybody's already eligible, but provide slightly larger ESAs for the people that live in the poorest places.
Okay. And then in terms of the environmental impact,
Yeah,
so right now you're showing that from the dark green places, people then are traveling into the, in terms of work, they're traveling.
probably. Yes, that's
Right,
something
probably,
else
right. Yeah,
we need to
yeah.
document that as part of the research.
So then, I mean, what is going on then with the schools? If the parents then from the low income neighborhoods are then choosing outside of the poverty regions, what's going on with the transportation and the environment in the families then choosing outside of the the high poverty areas? How does that work?
Well, the typical narrative is that young families like downtowns, and
Yeah.
it's a happening place. But then they start having kids, and the first one of them gets to be schoolage, and they say, "Hey, the only choice we have with our income is to put them in the local public school, and we're not doing that." So they move to where they can find better schooling, often in the suburbs, and then the family breadwinner or winners have to commute to their jobs in the inner city in order to make that work. So we need to put some numbers to that, but that's a pretty standard narrative of what's been going on in our cities, and the data we've got so far, what we call flight rates, show that in the inner city there are a lot more 0 to 4 year old kids than 5 to 9 year old kids, which means that people are fleeing when their oldest child, son or daughter, gets to be school age, so that they can access slightly better schooling in the outlying areas,
Okay.
typically
So
outlying
so
areas.
my so I'm thinking there would be a switch. It wouldn't be the adults then commuting, it would be the children. Is that
No, 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 no. The
Tell me
adults,
how that, right?
yeah, the
If the
adults
adults were
move.
commuting for jobs, but now it's moved, but the kids can do school. Are the kids now making the commute
No, 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 no.
to the school?
The
What am I
families are
misunderstanding? Yeah.
the families are moving to the attendance area of a better school so that their kids are eligible to attend those schools, but now they're 10, 15, 20 miles from where they work, and so they have to commute in to work
Okay.
students.
Okay.
Yeah, they have to move to the attendance area of the better school that they want to access if they can
Yes.
afford the
Okay.
housing there. So the kids are in their neighborhood school, but now their jobs are far away, and so they have to drive to and from. And of course, that hurts families. All the money spent on commuting and the time that it takes out of their day. Yeah, that's part of the devastation of this captivity effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I really appreciate it, John. Thank you. Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Well, thanks for asking. I'm sure others have the same question.
Sure.
Thanks so much, Holly. Does anyone else have any questions?
This is great. I do have to run soon, but I'm one of the keys too is having smaller schools, right? The Europeans, the Canadians, especially in the elementary level, their schools are usually about a fifth as large as ours, and that would lead to a lot of pushback from a lot of political pushback, both from the education establishment, but also to some degree from cities and towns. So, just any thoughts on that?
Well, as long as the traditional public school is tasked with trying to fit every child in their attendance area, that they're not going to get any smaller, but we'll get smaller private schools and maybe smaller charter schools to the extent that we free people from being a captive of that assigned school. So, Bob, I'm not sure I answered how we're going to get to smaller schools. Once we get rid of attendance areas, if we succeed at that, then we can have smaller traditional public schools, because then the public schools will no longer have to be the one size that attempts to fit all, and then they can specialize in different things. As frankly, some public schools already accidentally and secretly do. They're better at handling some kinds of kids just by who they happen to hire and where they happen to be than other kinds of kids. I documented that study in the journal School Choice, actually, I think is the paper that shows that. So specialization is just kind of a normal thing of enterprises, schools included. And even when they're not allowed or not supposed to specialize because they're supposed to fit all, they tend to. So school choice within the public system would be useful as well, but is not nearly enough. We need school choice to include the education entrepreneurs that are going to diversify the system so that when one size doesn't fit all, the system will fit all.
And if I
Cool.
could just, if I
Yeah, go
could
ahead.
interrupt just a minute, Bob, just to expand on that just a little, I'm going to use a phrase that my husband David uses all the time, and that is, the theory of dynamic human behavior. When you are stuck in a captive system, then you're going to do what the captive system says, which means you expand these schools and get these big schools. But if we were to be able to break that apart and remove the captivity, what's going to happen? People are going to go to the place that does best for their children. And just by the nature of that market spontaneity and the entrepreneurship that will develop, you're going to have smaller schools.
Well, that makes sense. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Would anybody like me to go back to a slide that they wanted to look at once again before we do? That's why I left the slideshow up here. But I can stop share if that'll put our faces more prominently on the screen. Anybody want to have another look at one of the slides before I shut that down?
I'm not sure I'm blue. Can I get a copy of the slideshow? That was actually really interesting. Like, Mark,
You could email me for that, but it'll be on YouTube pretty soon. So
I'll be on YouTube pretty soon. Okay.
either or both. So just send a this, I guess this slide doesn't have the better email address. Yeah, iopachief@policytalk.org. Send an email to that, and sure, glad to.
Nate, if you didn't get that, I can get that for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And with that, I think if there are no other comments, I think we have completed. If anyone wants to stick around, please, you're welcome to. But thank you so much for being here today.